Hello and welcome to Harper Podcast. I'm your host, Amrita Tripathi. I'm a writer, a reader, and someone who's very interested in the world of books. So on this journey, you'll be hearing from writers from the HarperCollins universe talking about their books, the big ideas, and even how ideas can change the world we live in.
On this month's edition of Harper Podcast, we're featuring the incredible Deepa Malik. She's a Paralympic hero. She's the first Indian woman to win a medal in the Paralympic Games, has so many awards to her name, and is the author of the book Bring It On. She talks about her life, her trajectory, what it takes to win 23 international medals and then some, and what keeps her going. Listen in to a fascinating conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Harper Podcast. I'm your host, Amrita Tripathi, beyond delighted to bring you a conversation today with the inspiring, the incredible Deepa Malik, the first Indian woman to win a medal in the Paralympic Games. Deepa has won many awards, including the Padam Shri, the Khel Ratna, the Arjuna Awards, and we're adding author to your list of accomplishments. Deepa, thank you so much for joining us to chat about Bring It On and your journey.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor being on the podcast. Thank you.
So I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about, what led you to share this story? Because, for those of you who are about to read this autobiography, Deepa, you've been super honest, not just about the highs, but also, the challenges along the way. Your journey has had, many ups and downs, and you've been really honest throughout. Can you share a little bit about why you wanted to share your story?
I think people started knowing me mostly post my Rio medal. And Rio medal, the Rio Paralympics medal with all the media attention, because it was the first ever in the country. And it was a stepping stone, a milestone for Indian sports history. So I have always been perceived as somebody who is an achiever. And with the medal came a lot of cash awards, incentives. And people looked upon me, oh my God, look at this woman. She's now rich. She's accomplished. She is hobnobbing with the achievers and the biggies. So people looked at me on a pedestal. But they did not understand the journey from the lowest more level of emotion, of physical trauma, of challenges, and what it took, what thirst, what power, inner strength it took to reach that pedestal or on top of the pedestal. So I thought that in the 25th year of my life on the wheelchair, and that's why I have my beautiful wheelchair on the cover also. And I think the picture is very symbolic, which expresses that if the lower part of the body was not working, instead of cribbing over the fact that my glass is half full, I always looked at half empty. I looked at it as half full, and I strengthened the part which was left and not paralyzed. And I needed everyone to live this journey with me of the silver jubilee year that I am in, the journey of me finding the silver linings through the clouds of adversities to reach the silver medal for which people know me.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And, I also want to say, right at the start in the prologue, you talk about, the challenge for you. You didn't get to go to the London Paralympics. That was a, stepping stone. But you said, I didn't retire from living when I first became bedridden with a spinal tumor at the age of 5. I didn't retire from life when I was dealt with paralysis from the chest down at 29 years old. And I wasn't going to let missing the London Paralympics force me to retire. And later you want to say to everyone who doubted me, I said, bring it on. And I was just thinking that actually encapsulates the amazing spirit. And I know it can't have been easy because, you do tell us a little bit about the challenges, which we'll come to in a second. But Deepa, we'll start at the beginning because, you talk about this, the support you've got from your family, but when you were a child, that was a huge, huge thing to deal with. And I found it really moving also to read about how your parents were also constantly there by your side, but also hearing, all these societal prejudices against girls, Can you take us a little bit to that, through that little chapter of what happened when you were younger? How did your family deal with it? And what motivated you to keep going?
First time I ever learned about, the awareness around the gender and the stereotypical thoughts about gender was when I was an outdoorsy kid. They would call me a boy. And they said, "Oh, she behaves like a boy. She should have been born a boy." And when I became bedridden due to the illness, then they accused me of being a girl. That, oh my God, the girl is going to be a liability. And so I felt it even as a very small girl, 5-year-old. I felt it in the tears of my mother. I felt it in the uh, voices. May not understand them as much, but I knew that people around who came to visit uh, left with some statement that made my mother cry, because otherwise I would see my parents absolutely on the go, planning a day ahead. They were always, working hard for my treatment, for physiotherapy, for rehab. Mummy getting up early to cook for the day so that she could pack lunches for my father, for my brother, and then also get some goodies from home for me to eat, because hospital food can get monotonous. So I was seeing them very positive. In the afternoon, we used to play the board games. My brother was also brought to the hospital, and parallelly, we were made to study something or the other, read storybooks. For me, when I was just with my parents and my brother, the hospital stay was like a picnic. It was an extended picnic. There's going to be a picnic basket that's going to come. There's going to be some new goodie out there. And afternoon, we are all going to sit together and play. There was so much of family time, always getting their attention. But the moment someone would come and go was when, for some time post that, and I always wondered, but as I grew up, I understood that uh, the girl for whom my parents were praying, working very hard, they never let me have any kind of a gender bias there. Of course, my teens were tough. Teens were tough, but
Yeah,
yes,
you taught you
whenever
tough on them also, it sounds like.
yeah, I think I was also the rebel in me was a bit challenging for them. But yes, childhood thing, and and this whole gender bias thing came back. I mean, of course, you will ask me about that. But when I saw the same thing happen to my daughter,
Yeah.
and when it happened to my daughter, and then I realized why my mother used to cry. And that also made me wonder that 22 years have gone by between my illness and my daughter's illness.
Yeah.
But the comment, two generations have changed. India is entering the computer world, the information technology world. We are already on the moon. We are talking about reaching the Mars. We have understood nuclear energy. Everything is progressing except this same old comment about a female child in disability. So that is something which I believe concerned me, and it also became my purpose eventually.
Yeah, I think what's incredible is like, what you said earlier about the glass half full, and the way you've taken it almost as a mission, because, in sharing all of this so openly, sharing your own achievements, sharing the attitude of your own family, I think it's just really heartening to see that, you all were like, really, bring it on. We're going to tackle this together. We're going to, talk a little bit about I think how that plays out in your life when it comes to tackling bias. I think disability rights has been something that you've been very, very passionate about advocating for. But you're such a champion. Oh my God, 23 international medals, 68 national and state level medals, swimming, javelin, shot put, and discus. And, when we look at this phase of your life, as you rightly pointed out, most of us got to know you through those headlines, right? When you won the medals. We didn't really know what had happened. So, as a child, you recovered after this, with very intense physio. You talk very movingly about your life and getting on with you married into the army. There's a lot happening there. But then again, in your late 20s, I believe it is, you get this the shock of the diagnosis again. Can you take us through a little bit about your mindset there and how you tackle that chapter?
Well, I was really taken aback when I had to go through my daughter's illness, which was almost like mine. Just when I was celebrating my walking through the tiny footsteps of my little girl who had just learned walking. And then she meets with an accident, has a head injury due to the impact. She gets paralyzed on the left side of her body. And being from the army, we had to rush her to the same hospital. It comes, it's like a movie script. It's unbelievable, because it was absolutely unbelievable for me to be in the same. People talk about deja vu, but this is not the deja vu that I was looking at. With the same hospital, the same pediatric ward, with the same neurological condition, and absolutely the same kind of reactions, stereotypical, coming my way. And but there was something that I learned. That's why I said this book is not just about a sportswoman who is winning medals for the country, or who's talking about how sports are meant to be played, or it doesn't really speak about that only. It is also a guide to parents. Parenting guidance is also there. It can also give you some lessons in how leading with an example is the best way forward for parenting. It will also make you understand how to accept a child with different capacities and capabilities, because we tend to compare our children with other children, and we have to realize that each child is different. And the kind of love and acceptance that we give to your child is going to make the person that they will eventually become when they grow up. This is also about how relationships can go through a roller coaster when you are dealing with a long-term illness. Because my parents dealt with mine, and me and my husband had this whole challenge of bringing up Devika, because we did not even know whether her mental IQ is going to be the same, or what is the consistency of enthusiasm in her regular physiotherapies and rehabilitations, which becomes a lifestyle. So we converted it into sports rather than making it look like a rehabilitation for the medical condition. And that gives you, if you are only telling the child that you are being treated for an illness, the child does not have proper self-esteem, self-worth. But if the same child is being encouraged to physical activities, adventure activities, to outdoor activities and sports activities, and there is a sense of self-worth, there is a sense of fitness, there is a self-confidence, social integration that comes with it. So we were, that was also the reason I wrote this book. But just when I was dealing with her illness, and uh, like I said, when I say bring it on, I say that I'm all right to accept any challenge, because I'm willing to adapt. I'm willing to learn. I will become a solution finder after gathering information about the situation. That is also something that can be taken away from this book by young youth who give up very easily today. And my illness, when I felt I was definitely devastated, because it was a time when husband was at the war, and every day we were hearing people dying and sacrificing and becoming martyrs for the country. Uh, I was being a very brave army wife who had sent her husband off to war and was facing her own war back home, uh, still struggling with the illness of Devika, her rehab, and bringing up another small girl who was just 3.5. And that's when you're told that you may die, or if the surgery is successful and we are able to save your life and save the infection from spreading and control the tumor, and wait and watch, because we do not know how the body is going to react, how quickly the tumor is going to come back. So, and it was a redo surgery because I had already had that surgery in the same spot. So, not a very great picture was painted in front of me, but I still looked for that one bright spot, one bright silver lining. Okay, let me live. So, what I live on a wheelchair, I will learn, but right now, the priority is to be alive. Because so I told the doctor, I said, just do your best, don't worry about just get the infection out, and don't worry about me being on a wheelchair. I You do a great job in the surgery, you save my life, you erase all the infections of the tumor so that they don't come back again, and I promise you that I will make my wheelchair into my wheelchair. I'll work hard. I will do all the rehabilitation. I've already done it once and I know how it is done. So that gave a lot of faith to the doctors also. I was very happy to hear post my coma, because after one surgery the cerebral fluid leaked. The next surgery happened and then I was unconscious for the longest time. I woke up with some speech disorders which I had to overcome. And even now, if I am too tired, or if the light is too bright in my eyes, or if there are many noises behind me, if I have to speak in a focused way, then I need a lot of focus. I start losing my speech. And it is so surprising that I could overcome even that. And today, my basic earning comes from my motivational sessions.
Just getting goosebumps listening to you. It doesn't happen often, but after reading you and listening to you, I mean, hats off, man. I think I also want to tell our readers, you're getting a sense from this conversation, to our listeners and audience, you get a sense from this conversation. This is actually the spirit of the book. It's not, there are these moments where you're just reading very, very devastating things happening. And then you have Deepa's voice coming through saying, but I decided to, for example, we're going to come to the rally driving chapter because it's pretty fascinating how you meet someone and she's always loved cars and motorcycles, and you meet this guy in physio, I think it is, right? And he said in the next life, because you said you want to compete one day, and he says in the next life.
Yes.
But before that anecdote, I want to just say also, there's such an Indian family angle to this, I feel, because in the best possible way, because when you are being very brave and not telling anyone about this, you bump into someone at the hospital who ends up being an uncle or something, who tells your mother that this is a very serious thing you're going through, right? And then your mom comes down to make sure you have support. I thought that was also very, very poignant to hear.
I think I don't know. I that's why I say I'm a bit spiritual also. There was a divine power, and maybe subconsciously I had learned through all the adversities that it is always, my father always said, oh, I have named my daughter Deepa. And I would often ask him, why did you name me Deepa? Because as a kid, I don't know if I mentioned it in the book, but as a kid, I was always called Peepa, Peepa. And Peepa is an empty tin box, like it's a tin box we used to get to put a lot of biscuits and cookies those days. And so there used to be big cans of tin. That was Peepa. So I said, Papa, you didn't name me well, people tease me and they call me Peepa, and my cousins would pull my legs. And he would say, no. Then he would always show me a lamp, and he would take me to the little mandir that we had in our home. We always have this little corner where you have the deities' pictures and you light a lamp. And he says, what's that? I said, that's Almighty. What do we do every day to please the Almighty? We light the lamp. He says, you're that lamp. You are somebody who is meant to, you are the first offering, you're the first person who pleases the Almighty and the divine power. You also light up where the divine power is there. And then you say, it is always better to light a lamp than to curse the dark. So he would often, always remind me my name. And subconsciously, I think, even if he would tell a story to me as a child, which were actually my nursery of value system imbibed inside me, at the end he would say, so what did you learn? So, okay, that's the moral of the story. Moral of the story. Okay. So, this is the lightness. This is the brightness. This is where the light of knowledge comes. And what are you? You are the light. So, this is how. So, I think I was always made to know that if I light the lamp of knowledge, I'll be able to reach the solution. And I always felt that I will be able to find a way out. This is something, that's why I said I never give up. I always immediately change to solution mode. And that's exactly what happened. Even then I felt that my mummy is alone. My father was also not in the country at that point of time. My brother is also an army man. He was deputed on his own duties. My husband was already at the war. And I felt that children needed my mother. She had to be back home strong for my daughters. And in any case, whatever has to be done by the doctors. So it's best that my daughter stays back with my mother, continues her physiotherapy. Their education is not sacrificed, because I knew I was in for something long term. And coming back to that rally part, today, even while we are having this interaction, and I'm in Chennai, and I was under the impression it's going to be an audio interview. And suddenly at the last minute, my daughter says, "Mom, you have to get up. What are you doing? Get up, comb your hair, sit up. It's a audio visual." And I said, "Audio visual, but I'm not carrying my laptop." And she says, "What? You're not carrying a laptop?" I immediately called up a couple of rally buddies, motorcycle friends. And fact, they were here with every paraphernalia that was required to get this. And this is the biggest manifestation of becoming a rally driver or driving again that I did, because it's a beautiful community. It's a community that looks out for each other, because adventure sports is a high risk element sport where people understand that wherever we are, it has to be a strong camaraderie. So it was a win-win situation. I wanted to do that because that's what I am. When somebody challenges me, I said, "Okay, bring it on. I'm going to do it now." So that was one aspect of doing the rallies. The other impact of rally was that the Motor Vehicle Act changed. People like me started getting licenses to do adventure rallies. I was the first one to raise a voice. I found a purpose and a sense of achievement there. And through my foundation, I've got many persons with disabilities and even women to do very high-end adventure motor rallies. So that is also a sense of great self-worth and achievement, that yes, you could make a change. But along with it, what positive thing that happened when everybody in the rally world or the motorcycle world heard my story or heard my appeal that there is a woman in chest below paralysis who wants to define herself with the wheels of her choice. And my wheels of choice were that of a motorbike or that of a car rally driver, because the wheelchair's wheels is not something I chose. They are something I accepted gracefully, because they are extended part of my body and give me mobility. And I am grateful for this assistive aid that I sit on. I never feel guilty. I never feel sad. It does not make me any complex inside me. And that's what I make an appeal through my book, that sitting on a wheelchair is not a taboo. It is not being a wheelchair bound. It is being a wheelchair liberated person, because you get your mobility with it. And coming back to the rally thing, once I had become a rally driver or a motorcyclist, I had so many friends across the country. Any city I went, I had bunch of biker buddies or rally buddies always there for me as my backup support system. So if the infrastructure was not in my favor, I did not have end-to-end accessibility, I did not have funding to afford a living place or a bigger vehicle to carry my throw frame or my wheelchair. I always had bunch of friends. I joined all the communities where we had these rally drivers, and because we have communities where you can call out for help at any point, at any road. The nearest bunch of people reach you and support you if you have a vehicle breakdown or you have an accident doing a ride across the country. And having done these records, because I had driven from Chennai to Delhi, I had done high altitude mountain drives, I had created records doing rallies on the bikes. So this community was there. In the quest of being a biker, I became a swimmer first and then an athlete. And whatever I did in rallies became my support system to persistently and consistently follow the journey of para sports, which otherwise would have become difficult because I need help for everything.
That is incredible, and getting getting the understanding of how you are a motivational speaker because this is as you said, this has been a chapter in your life as
So
well.
it was like a solution finding, and it was a multifold solution finding. And when persons with disabilities heard about it, even they started finding their own groups and friend circles and reaching out to strangers for help.
Yeah,
And that eases out the burden on the family also.
yeah.
Initially, when I used to travel, I and when family travels with you, sacrificing, taking leave from their work or something, you feel guilty. You feel dependent. But when you are getting the same help from friends, that friendships you have created, who are voluntary coming and spending time with you, you feel socially integrated. You feel happy meeting people. You know you are among friends, and not and to those who are there, they're there by choice. They have taken out time to be with you. So this whole monotonous help of the family, that eases down, and that makes you mentally also very um, happy. And I think happiness quotient is the most important, because that keeps you motivated all the time.
And it's such a good way of putting it because it's also a community that you've created, you've co-created. We may not have time to talk about all of the incredible things you've done because you've also been an entrepreneur. There's this beautiful bit you talk about setting up that restaurant, which also becomes a community and becomes a pillar of support for folks there. So another reason to read this book, folks, bring it on. There's so many stories here. Deepa, a couple more things I'd like to ask you. You were very open in the book, and I think throughout your public speaking as well. And you just alluded to the challenges along the way. You said you need help with many things that perhaps we would not think about even, and not just us but the sports organizations. You had to kind of fight at every step of the way to get access to accessibility, to get help, to get physiotherapists. And I was also really surprised because I feel like it's the first time I'm reading someone talking about the financial hardships also, because from the outside, again, like you said when we kicked off, we all got to know you after the awards, right? Reading about you in the headlines, and sort of generous and well-deserved recognition from the state government, from the national government. But can you take us through a little bit about why you wanted to be clear about the financial hardships? Because I think for a lot of people that will also resonate. It's one
when I said that I'm going to go to Delhi to play because I'm going for Commonwealth Games, and when I came for Commonwealth Games, I realized that the entire contingent was moving to prepare for the forthcoming Asian Games. And Asian Games also had a parallel vertical of Asian Para Games. But there wasn't any fixed camp out there. And I had qualified by virtue of having participated in an international event under the aegis of International Paralympic Committee. And in the Commonwealth Village, I heard all the leading athletes, Gagan Narang, Vijendra, we had Yogeshwar Dutt, we had Geeta, Babita. They all were talking about their Asian camp, and there was no conversation about our camps. I suddenly found not only a purpose, but also a direction that I am there. I'm doing well internationally, and I think I can win a medal for my country despite being 40 years of age. And then I decided to stay put in Delhi. That also caused a bit of a rift in my marriage because my husband, out of concern, said that we don't know anybody in Delhi. We don't have a home in Delhi. We have given you a palatial, a farmhouse in Maharashtra. Everything is set. Your entrepreneurship, your restaurant is doing well. Why do you want to go? And that again hit me. And I said, okay, this is the journey I want to pursue because I know I can win that Asian medal. And the Asian medal was something which was very special because I'd seen Asian Games in 1982 with my father. And it just felt as if that little dream of my childhood can come turn into a reality. And at the same time, because of being an educated, grown woman, I can now demand for policies. And Delhi is where the difference is going to happen because the government heads sit there. So when I left home, I just took a car, the car which I had made for myself. I took one suitcase, one wheelchair, one backpack, and I left. And I reached Delhi. And of course, that is also another story because a lot of my rally friends helped me. And for 2 years, I was not in conversation with my husband because I was not talking to him. The family also said, what's happening? I said, no, let me do this on my own. Till I have won that medal, I'm not going to go back home. And I'm on my own. I did it, but when I reached, I realized I needed money for accommodation, for transportation, for training, for gym, for buying a javelin, which actually costed 1 lakh rupees. The funding programs was not there. I also needed injury management expert. I had to have my psychological counselings for sports. I had to eat a nutritious particular diet. When I started calculating my monthly expenses, they were skyrocketing. I just didn't know. So I ended up taking one room in the Shahpur Jat area, and I lived in that one room in a gully. And nobody would believe that, because people now, those who know me, oh, she was always very lucky. She was wife of a colonel. She never had any challenges. But yes, I faced those challenges. I reached out to Rotary. I reached out to ONGC. I wrote thousands of emails to people. Sometimes I would take up a motor rally and get sponsorship through that, save that money, and then use it for my sports. It wasn't easy. It was just not easy. And then being at the training area where you don't have wheelchair accessible bathroom, where you don't have a room to go and change, where you are actually putting your car next to the boundary wall, opening both the doors, leaning on them and passing urine, or lying in the back seat and trying to change the diapers. So it wasn't easy in the beginning because nobody was believing that a woman in 40 years of age is wanting to win a medal. So yes, and when I used to reach out to corporates, there was no definition of para sports in India at that point.
Yeah.
And the federation was going through its own ups and downs by getting debarred and de-recognized. So it was a very tough phase, those 4 or 5 years, initial years in Delhi, till we actually had at-par policies being introduced and we started getting our cash rewards.
Hmm. And you've been such a pioneer of that because you do track the trajectory. It changes as a medal start coming in.
Every medal makes your voice stronger. I got the Asian Para Games, became the first woman in India to win the Asian Para Games medal. Then became the first man or woman to win a world championship medal. Then I got my Arjuna Award. And eventually was made a member in the 5-year planning commission in the working group for formulation of policies for para sports. And then once Honorable Prime Minister took it as his, a focus, and policies became inclusive, then big things became a little easy for me. Yeah. But the 4 years initially were very, very hard. And I had to devise another solution, and that was becoming a motivational speaker with the corporates and the educational institutes who could give me some money. I've even done 2 hour sessions for just 5,000 rupees to collect that money.
Yeah. And that I think really is something that resonates, with anyone who might have a dream and not have the privilege or access to get there.
And
But
I
I think,
wanted my children to shift to Delhi because I needed that backup and I wanted to be with them and then taking care of their education, not speaking to your husband for those 2, 3 years. It was a lot of emotional up and down going on.
there was a lot, and then I think,
Yeah, but it's all fine now.
yes, I think the other thing that's really interesting is in parallel, because you're able to achieve these things so publicly, you become kind of a spokesperson for other athletes, other champions. You were president of the Paralympic Committee for India for a while. At present, you're the South Asian representative for the Asian Paralympic Committee. So it really feels like that's been an important part of your identity as well. Just making sure that the policies are in place, that you can represent, and that you can advocate for other athletes like yourself.
This is also something that comes out of the book, that it was very easy for me to have sit back and enjoy, and I the kind of financial stability that I got through the cash awards policies of my government. I got crores of rupees. I could have just uh, sat back and enjoyed the rest of my life, but
Yeah,
I
maybe chill a bit. Maybe chill a bit.
enrolled myself in a good governance course. I studied how to be an administrator. I worked hard, but that was also a lot of learning process, and it takes a toll because you really have to. When you were playing, you were only playing for one sport, but when you are an administrator, you have to take care of all the sports. You have to know their rules, regulations, requirements, equipments. What is the timeline? There are parallelly 20 teams which need to go. Their visas processes, their funding programs, execution of all the amenities and facilities. And prior to that, you have to get their kits made. So there was a lot of work, and then it was a lot of work, and a lot of people said, "You why now you've retired? You're 50. You can take a back seat." But I'm happy. I always say that when I went to play sports, I got only one medal for my country. But in the 4 years of my administrative leadership tenure, I could bring 48 Paralympic medals for my country, and I added 14 more female medals to the tally. I think I was one of the luckiest. I mean, it's easy to say luckiest, but it takes a lot of hard work. But I'm happy, like seeing that faith, that honesty in executing my administrative duties, where we could take the tally so high, and also incredible. Started organizing international events.
Yeah. And now, I mean, you finally see that, even the headlines and the mainstream media covering with a lot of pride and joy, I think,
We started the social media handles. During my tenure, we had a lot of educative programs where even the media was sensitized to how to report, because we have different categories, we have different uh, sports, and how to report when we have a point system result. So today there's a lot of support from media. While I talk to you, I'm here for the 23rd National Para Athletics Championship, which is being hosted in Chennai.
Wow.
And we have already conducted the technical staff, and that is the courses for the technical staff, because you'll be happy to learn in September, October, we are hosting the World Para Athletics Championship, which is one of the biggest event in the para sports fraternity, because maximum athletes participate in the disability sports in athletics. That is the biggest arm of Paralympic sport, and India will be the host in New Delhi.
That's incredible.
That's
That is
really
incredible.
incredible. And I think it's going to change the way the world will look at India, because we are always often accused of being not so sensitive. We don't know how to transfer people or transport people with disabilities. So a lot of sensitization going to happen. The hotel industry, the travel industry, the sports administrative industry, everybody is going to learn about the para sports administration at such a large level. And this will also be a stepping stone, a milestone that is going to be for the bidding that India has done for 2036 Olympics. Because when you bid for Olympics, you also have to host Paralympics.
Yeah.
So it feels very good to give back.
And it's such an interesting, like, I mean, what a journey, because you've seen when there was no infrastructure or support as such.
In the same stadium, and now having the World Championship being organized there.
It's incredible. Well, it does sound like you're going to have a super busy year, which I feel like after reading your book and talking to you is exactly how you like it. I think you're going to be enjoying this moment. Huge congratulations to you for everything that you do, Deepa, and also for this book.
Yeah.
Bring It On is
It's
really...
also like a guidebook for somebody who wants to start playing.
Right.
Because in disability, then you'll get a fair idea as to what is the process of playing. How you start at a district level to state level to nationals to international. What are the nitty-gritties? What are the kind of disability categories are there? How you require a license and a medical classification. So it is not just my autobiography. I think it can be a guidebook for husband-wife relationships, for child and parent relationship, for how to manage your life in a long-term disability.
Yeah.
And how to celebrate life.
How to celebrate life. And a shout out to your co-writer Soni Sangwan, who was a former colleague and friend. I'm so happy that she got to work on this book with you
Yes,
as well.
what I loved about Soni was she did not change the essence of what I wanted to say. Sometimes when you're writing with somebody while transcribing and while putting it down, she has tried to adapt the narration as it is. So when I read it, I feel that it's my language, and that is a very difficult thing for any writer to do, to retain the essence and the language and the flavor of the person who's writing the autobiography. So a huge thank you to her. I couldn't have done it without her.
And your voice really does come through. So I feel like it's an incredible book. Congratulations again, and wishing you all the best. Those of you who've been listening or watching, please do check out the book and share your comments.
I think HarperCollins is going to start coming out with the Hindi version also.
Oh, brilliant!
Sometime, so that will have a more reach in the rural areas, and where I want more and more women who are homemakers also to study or to read.
That's a wonderful thing. That's great to hear. Thank you so much, Deepa. I will we'll end for the moment, but definitely have to have a follow-up chat with you later in the year after the big big event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You have a good day. Thank you.
You're listening to Harper Podcast, and we certainly hope you enjoyed listening. Stay tuned for more episodes. This podcast is available on Spotify and Hubhopper. You can also stay updated with HarperCollins' new books, subscribe to the Harper Broadcast newsletter, and find us on social.